Deep in the rainforests of eastern Madagascar, there's a sound that stops people cold the first time they hear it. It starts low, almost like a moan, then rises into a wailing, siren-like cry that rolls through the canopy and carries for more than a mile. The first time European explorers heard it, some of them thought they were listening to a person in agony. They were not. They were listening to the Indri, the largest living lemur on Earth, and quite possibly one of the strangest and rarest animals most people in the United States have never heard of. If you ask the average person to name an endangered animal, you would probably get the same 5 or 6 answers. Pandas, tigers, rhinos, maybe a polar bear. Almost nobody would say Indri, and that is exactly the problem because this animal is disappearing faster than almost any of those more famous species. And once it is gone, there is no backup plan. No zoo breeding program, no captive population waiting in reserve. When the wild Indri population runs out, that is it, forever. Let's start with what makes this animal so unusual to begin with. The Indri, sometimes called by its local name Babakoto, looks like something a cartoonist invented. It has a round teddy bear face, tufted black ears, piercing eyes that shift between gold and green, and a thick coat of black and white fur. It can weigh up to 21 pounds and stretch nearly 2.5 feet from head to rear, making it the largest of all lemur species alive today. But here's the detail that throws people off the moment they see a photograph. It has almost no tail, a stub of 5 or 6 centimeters barely there. Every other lemur species on Madagascar, more than 100 of them, has a long sweeping tail they use for balance. The Indri is the one exception, and locals have long joked that it looks like a small child in a black and white fur coat sitting upright in the trees. That upright posture is not an accident. Indris move through the forest by launching themselves vertically from tree trunk to tree trunk, a style of locomotion scientists call vertical clinging and leaping. Their back legs are dramatically longer and more powerful than their arms, built like coiled springs. A single leap can cover more than 30 feet, roughly the distance of 2 parked cars end to end, and they do it without hesitation, sailing between vertical trunks high in the canopy, 40 meters or more above the forest floor. And yet, despite that explosive athleticism, Indris are actually fairly low-energy animals for most of the day. Their diet is almost entirely leaves, and leaves, especially older ones, are extremely low in usable calories. So an Indri spends less than half its waking hours actually foraging, and the rest of the time sitting still, digesting. Their bodies are built around this problem. They have oversized salivary glands to help break down plant fiber before it even reaches the stomach. An enlarged stomach and an unusually long looping intestinal tract, plus expandable pouches between the large and small intestine that host specialized bacteria whose entire job is to ferment tough plant material the Indri's own body cannot break down on its own. It is, in a very real sense, farming bacteria inside itself, just to survive on a diet most animals would starve on. Now here's where the story gets genuinely strange, and this is the part almost nobody outside of Madagascar knows. The Indri sings, not calls, not barks, sings, in a way that scientists have now measured and compared directly to human music. A team of Italian and European researchers spent roughly 12 years recording Indri family groups deep in the Madagascar rainforest, gathering audio from dozens of individual animals. When they finally analyzed the recordings, mathematically, note by note, they discovered something remarkable. Indri songs follow what is called categorical rhythm, meaning the spacing between notes falls into precise, repeatable ratios, either exactly equal intervals or intervals that are exactly double, one another. This is the same rhythmic structure found in human music across nearly every culture on the planet. And until this study, it had never been documented in any mammal other than humans. Songbirds have rhythm. Some primates make coordinated calls, but a true, structured, human-like sense of musical timing, matched between multiple singers in a group, had simply never been proven outside our own species. One of the lead researchers on the project actually compared the pacing in Indri songs to the opening beat of the Queen's song, "We Will Rock You," pointing out that Indris were essentially using the same fundamental rhythmic pattern that a stadium full of humans instinctively claps along to. Even more interesting, Indris do not sing alone. A mated pair, and sometimes their older offspring, will sing together in overlapping, harmonized duets and choruses that can last anywhere from under a minute to well over 3 minutes at a stretch. Family members synchronize their voices, and researchers have found that young Indris actually sing off-tempo at first and gradually refine their timing as they mature, almost the way a child learning an instrument slowly tightens up their sense of rhythm over years of practice. The last common ancestor shared by humans. And Indris lived roughly 77.5 million years ago, which means this rhythmic ability almost certainly evolved completely independently in each lineage. Two branches of the primate family tree, separated for tens of millions of years, both arrived at the same basic musical trick on their own. Why would a folivorous lemur need anything resembling music in the first place? The leading theory is territory and identity. Indri groups are fiercely territorial, and their songs function as both a long-distance boundary marker, warning rival families to keep their distance, and a kind of vocal fingerprint that keeps a mated pair and their children bonded and easy to locate inside dense, low-visibility rainforest. A laryngeal air sac in the throat inflates during singing, acting almost like a natural amplifier, which is part of why these songs can be heard by human researchers more than a mile away, and by other Indri groups even farther than that. Family life among Indris is built around lifelong pairing. Indris are one of the relatively small number of mammals that practice long-term, essentially permanent monogamy. A mated pair stays together for years, often for life, raising a handful of offspring in a small home territory that the group defends together. If one partner dies, the survivor will eventually seek a new mate, but as long as both are alive, the bond typically holds. Like most lemur species, Indri society is female dominant. Females eat first, choose foraging routes, and generally make the group's key decisions, while males focus heavily on territory defense, scent marking boundaries with glands on the face and with urine to warn off intruders. Reproduction, though, is where the Indri's rarity becomes a mathematical inevitability rather than just bad luck. Female Indris do not reach reproductive maturity until 7 to 9 years of age, which is astonishingly late for a mammal this size. Once mature, a female typically gives birth to a single infant only once every 2 to 3 years, following a pregnancy of around 4 to 5 months. The infant clings to its mother's belly for the first several months of life, later moving to ride on her back, and stays close to its parents for roughly 2 years before beginning true independence. In the wild, Indris can live 15 to 18 years. Some estimates push it higher. So over an entire lifetime, a single female Indri might produce only a handful of surviving offspring. Compare that to a species like a mouse or even a common lemur cousin that can reproduce annually or more, and you start to understand why Indri populations, once they begin shrinking, are extraordinarily slow to recover. There simply is not enough reproductive output per year to outpace the threats stacking up against them. And this is where we get to a fact that genuinely shocks most Western audiences, because it breaks the standard playbook people expect from endangered species stories. Normally, when an animal population collapses in the wild, part of the rescue plan involves zoos. Captive breeding programs have helped pull species like the California condor, the black-footed ferret, and Przewalski's horse back from the edge of extinction. It is a proven strategy, and most people assume it applies to every endangered animal on some level. It does not apply to the Indri, because the Indri cannot survive in captivity at all. There has never, in recorded history, been a successful long-term captive Indri population anywhere on Earth. Every documented attempt to house an Indri outside Madagascar, and there have been multiple serious attempts by professional zoological institutions, has ended the same way. The animals decline and die, most within a year, some far sooner. Researchers still do not fully understand why. The leading theories point to that highly specialized bacteria-dependent digestive system, one that appears to be finely tuned to a very specific range of native Malagasy plant species and cannot easily be replicated with substitute leaves and produce available outside their home range. Chronic stress from confinement may also play a role, given how territorial and vocally expressive these animals are in the wild. Whatever the exact combination of causes, the outcome is the same. There are 0 Indris in captivity anywhere in the world today, and there never really have been, not for any meaningful length of time. This single fact quietly removes one of the biggest safety nets available to almost every other critically endangered mammal on the planet. If the wild population disappears, there is no reserve colony sitting in a zoo somewhere ready to repopulate the forest. The wild is the only place this species exists, has ever existed in any stable way, or ever will. So, what is actually pushing them toward that edge? The primary driver is habitat destruction. Indris are found only along a narrow strip of lowland and montane rainforest running down the eastern coast of Madagascar, and that forest has been under sustained pressure for decades from slash-and-burn agriculture, known locally as tavy, along with logging and the cutting of trees for charcoal and fuel wood. Even land officially inside protected reserves has not been fully spared because enforcement across much of Madagascar's protected area network is inconsistent, underfunded, and difficult to maintain given the country's broader economic and political challenges. As the forest gets cut into smaller and smaller fragments, Indri family groups become isolated from one another. A mated pair in one patch of forest may simply have no way to reach another patch to find new breeding partners, which chips away at genetic diversity and makes local populations more fragile with every passing generation. Hunting adds another layer to the threat, and it comes with a genuinely fascinating cultural backstory. Across much of Madagascar, the Indri is protected by fady, a system of traditional taboos. Origin legends passed down for generations describe the Indri as an ancestral relative of humans, sometimes explicitly called the father of a lost child, which is where the name Babakoto comes from, roughly translating to father of Koto or little father. In the most common version of the story, a man went into the forest searching for wild honey and never returned. His son went looking for him and also vanished. When villagers finally searched the forest themselves, they found no trace of either person, only 2 large lemurs sitting together in the canopy, watching them. The Indri's mournful, wailing song in this telling is the sound of a father and son crying out to a family they can never rejoin. Because of stories like this, in traditional Malagasy belief, killing or eating an Indri is considered deeply taboo in most regions. But taboos only work as long as people continue to honor them, and that cultural protection has been eroding. Population growth, migration between regions with different local customs, and economic desperation have all chipped away at fady in various parts of the Indri's range. Some communities that would never hunt Indri themselves due to their own local taboo will still sell the meat to outsiders whose taboos do not apply to that particular animal. In a handful of regions, Indri meat is treated as an outright delicacy, despite its sacred status elsewhere. The very taboo system that helped protect this species for centuries is slowly losing its grip. At exactly the same moment the species can least afford it. Put all of that together, shrinking and fragmenting habitat, a reproductive rate that can barely keep pace with natural mortality, even under good conditions, eroding cultural protection, and zero captive safety net. And the numbers tell a genuinely alarming story. Estimates for the total wild Indri population generally range somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 individuals. And even that range reflects real uncertainty because the dense terrain and remote forest make a precise count extremely difficult. What conservation scientists are far more confident about is the trend line. The International Union for Conservation of Nature currently lists the Indri as critically endangered, its most severe classification short of extinct in the wild, and projections suggest the population could decline by as much as 80% over the next 3 generations, a window of roughly 36 years. Some longer-range climate modeling adds another grim layer on top of that, suggesting that by the year 2080, warming temperatures and shifting rainfall patterns alone could shrink the Indri's viable range by close to 40%, independent of any further deforestation. There is still reason for hope, though, and it is worth ending on that note rather than pure despair. Because captive breeding is off the table, conservation groups working in Madagascar have shifted almost entirely toward protecting standing forest and supporting the local communities who share that land. Organizations working in corridors like the Ankenahani-Zahamena forest region have focused on tying conservation directly to local economic opportunity, training community members as forest rangers, supporting sustainable agriculture that reduces pressure to clear new land, and building ecotourism around guided treks to hear and see wild Indri groups in their natural habitat. That last piece matters more than it might sound. A live Indri singing in an intact forest, drawing paying visitors year after year, gives local communities a direct financial reason to keep that forest standing rather than clearing it. It converts an abstract global conservation goal into a concrete local incentive. A few more strange details round out just how singular this animal really is. Indris were essentially unknown to the wider world for a surprisingly long time. The first ever motion picture footage of a wild Indri was not captured until 1961, filmed using tape lures during an expedition that formed part of a young David Attenborough's early BBC series exploring Madagascar. Before that, almost nobody outside the island had ever actually seen one moving through the trees. Even the animal's common name carries a small myth of its own. For years, popular retellings claimed the word Indri came from a Malagasy phrase meaning "there it is," supposedly shouted by a local guide pointing the animal out to a visiting French naturalist in the late 1700s, who mistakenly assumed the phrase was the creature's actual name. Most researchers today consider that story more legend than fact, and think the name more likely comes from an older native word, Indrina. Either way, to the Malagasy people themselves, the animal has always gone by Baba Kodo, not Indri. Indris also share their patch of rainforest with one of Madagascar's strangest predators, the fossa, a lean, muscular, cat-like carnivore found nowhere else on Earth, and closely related to the mongoose rather than to any cat. Fossas are agile enough to chase prey through the trees, and along with large birds of prey, they represent one of the only natural threats a full-grown Indri has to watch for. Beyond predators, Indris have one more oddly human-like habit that field researchers love pointing out: sunbathing. On cool mornings, an Indri will often climb to an exposed branch, sit upright, and stretch its arms outward to soak in direct sunlight for several minutes at a time, almost exactly the posture a person might strike while warming up outdoors before eventually settling back into the canopy to feed. It is a strange kind of privilege to be one of a shrinking number of animal species that can genuinely only be experienced in one place on the entire planet, deep in the rainforest of eastern Madagascar, and nowhere else. No zoo enclosure, no wildlife park, no backup population waiting anywhere else in the world. If the Indri survives, it will only be because the forest it depends on survives, and because the communities living alongside it are given real reasons to protect it. If it does not, we will lose something that took tens of millions of years of separate evolution to produce a rhythm, a song uncannily close to our own. For now, in patches of surviving canopy along Madagascar's eastern coast, that eerie, unmistakable wail still rises through the trees most mornings, one of the last wild songs of its